time, I invite Dr. Eric Chancellor to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Reverend. Dr. Arnold M. Eisen is the 7th Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Dr. Eisen is a recognized expert in religious change and the modern transformation of Jewish religious belief and practice. He is one of the world's foremost authorities in the sociology of American Judaism. Dr. Eisen has written and lectured extensively on the relation between Israel and the diaspora, as well as the nature of Jewish identity and religious practice in America. Since his appointment in 2007, Chancellor Eisen has increased the seminary's impact on the communities it serves by transforming the education of religious leadership for conservative Judaism, articulating a new vision for JTS, guiding the formulation of a strategic plan to implement that vision, and developing innovative programs in synagogue practice, adult education, pastoral care, Jewish thought, interreligious dialogue, and the arts. Dr. Eisen regularly discusses Judaism and Jewish education, philosophy, and values on his blog, On My Mind, Arnie Eisen. Dr. Eisen has been on faculty at Stanford, Tel Aviv University, and Columbia. He earned his PhD in the history of Jewish law from Hebrew University, a bachelor's in philosophy and the sociology of religion at Oxford, and a BA in religious thought from the University of Pennsylvania. On behalf of the rabbi, the president, the board of trustees, and the entire B'nai Israel community, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Arnold M. Eisen as the inaugural speaker in the L'Dor V'Dor lecture series honoring the 90th anniversary of the founding of our shul. Chancellor Eisen.
It's really nice to be here, to be part of a celebration of 90. You know, not many synagogues make it to 90. And not many synagogues make it to 90 with this kind of vibrancy and this amount of youth and energy and vitality. So you should really feel good about this and keep careful records about what the secret is, because the secret sauce could be very helpful to a lot of synagogues around the country. I published a pamphlet called Conservative Judaism Today and Tomorrow about a year ago, which I hold up because you can get it as an ebook on Amazon, and we have study guides available and everything. But why I'm saying this is because I didn't know when I wrote a pamphlet, Conservative Judaism Today and Tomorrow, that the title would become controversial. But then last year, this Pew report came out, and what it basically told us is that not only conservative Judaism, but all non-Orthodox Judaism in America barely has it today, and almost certainly has no tomorrow. And I'm here to tell you that that is false, and almost ridiculously so in many cases, an exaggeration, and our future depends on what we do. The numbers are not in favor of non-Orthodox Judaism in America right now, but I can tell you that, as is true apparently in B'nai Israel, the quality in many areas of American Jewish life is very high. It's certainly true for conservative Judaism, but it's also true for this bigger swath I call the vital religious center of Jewish life, stretching from committed Reform and Reconstructionist Jews through liberal Orthodox Jews, that this big vital center has a lot of good things going for it right now. And so whether or not we have a future, and how good that future is, depends on pretty much what this community decides to do with its resources over the next 10 to 15 years. It really is an inflection point in the history of the community, as the surveys point out. And I want to try to show why this situation is what it is, and then what we should be doing about it, and talk a little bit about the Judaism that excites me, and perhaps excites you, and I think has a possibility of exciting many more hundreds of thousands of Jews in America. Somebody gave the lecture a title, Does American Jewry Have a Future? And of course the answer is yes, if we play our cards right. And I am an optimist about this, not just because my dad was an optimist and I inherited this from him, but because the facts bear us out. We as a people have survived many terrible curses, and it's reasonable to believe that having survived so many curses, we can also survive some blessings. We also have a lot going for us. And when you're the Chancellor of JTS, and you come to work every day, and you share the building with almost 500 students who are there because they are committed to building a future for Jewish life, almost all of them in North America. And you have faculty members and staff who are also there, engaged every day in building this future. It's very difficult to be pessimistic. Not only do I have a professional responsibility to be an optimist, but I am sustained in my optimism by the courage and conviction and energy and vitality and innovation of these 500 students I share the building with. So I invite you for the next half hour or so to hear the reasons for my conviction about the future of Judaism. I'll spend more time on conservative Judaism than the other kind of Judaism. But I think what I'm going to say about conservative Judaism holds for other kinds of Judaism that, as it were, adopt the same strategy, play by the same rules. And we'll talk about what that strategy is and what those rules can be. I want to make one more confession before I start, which is that I was, for 20 plus years, an academic. This is not an academic talk I'm giving here. I could do that talk. But I'm a committed Jew talking to committed Jews. And when I examine myself honestly, and when I examine our situation, I don't think that the number one force propelling us forward is books and ideas. Books and ideas matter a lot. I think personal human experience counts for a lot more. So if I'm standing before you today as the Chancellor of JTS and a leader of conservative Judaism trying to imagine conservative Judaism in the future, it's not just because I have this PhD from university and wrote all these books and articles about modern Judaism. It's because I lived my entire life as a conservative Jew. And I just want to share certain moments of my adult life with you that I think you'll identify with, because these highly emotional moments are not unconnected to the future success of our movement. So my daughter, who is now 28, and thankfully engaged to be married this coming June, was bat mitzvah at my congregation in Palo Alto, California, a wonderful conservative congregation called Kol Hamet. And when she stood up there as a bat mitzvah and did the Shacharit service and led the Torah procession around the synagogue and then read from the Torah and did the Haftorah and gave a Dvar Torah that was very learned, also very socially involved. It was Martin Luther King weekend. Her parsha was Vayera. I said to myself, where else but this kind of synagogue could this bat mitzvah have taken place? That bat mitzvah remains one of the highlights of my life. And it was thanks to conservative Judaism and its model of Judaism and the decision made quite a while ago in favor of egalitarianism that put that bat mitzvah into reality. And then, at the opposite end of the life cycle, was that my mother passed away in 1998. And not only was this a great community, which sustained me at that most difficult moment in my life until that point, but the way people related to me and the speeches that people gave, the way that that it was handled, the nature of the Shiva, the nature of the mourning period, it actually bears a stamp. You may not realize it, but that way that we may take for granted, that we speak about death, and we relate to one another at a time of need, that way of speaking is not common all over the Jewish world. It has a certain history to it. And that history is not unique to conservative Judaism, but it's unique to this vital religious center of North American Jewish life that I spoke about a few moments ago. And that preserves me. Let me just give you one more example. I'm here today because throughout my life I have had great teachers, many of them conservative rabbis. Starting from the age of 15 or 16 in Philadelphia, I had rabbis who were totally committed to Jewish life, totally committed to being a full participant in the larger society and culture of America. They were models for me. As radical and rebellious as I was at the age of 15, I could not stand up to the more radical rebelliousness of the rabbis who were my teachers. They gave me a living model of what it is to be on the inside, fully loyal, have all my intellectual faculties at work along with my emotional faculties and my spiritual faculties. I had the good fortune that I got to speak to Abraham Joshua Heschel personally. I also got to speak to Mordecai Kaplan personally. They have left their mark on me. Both of them, for many years, were at JTS. And it's these examples of living human beings and a style of learning and teaching that really is distinctive to conservative Judaism and to modern Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews and Reconstructionist Jews who are like conservative Jews in these regards. So I've only named 3 experiences. I can give you a lot more. My point here is we are not going to be sustained by books and ideas, even though books and ideas are important. We're going to be sustained by living human beings who are part of living communities. And we will either have these strong communities and make them vehicles of a kind of meaning with a capital M that people can't get elsewhere, or we will fail and deserve to fail. Build the communities, supply the meaning, and you will succeed. Do only one of those things, or don't do either of those things, and you will fail. And my reason for optimism is I not only know we can do this, but I know we do this all over the country. There are successful synagogues and camps and day schools and afternoon schools and youth groups. There are many that are less than successful, but there are many that are working really well. We know how to do this. And so to do more of this and do it more consistently, and I'm convinced we will be fine. And the nice thing is the data bears us out. So let me now spend a few minutes talking about the data, and I'll tell you up front what the lesson of all this data is. There were a lot of articles written in the wake of the Pew Report that cast blame and said, you are losing numbers because you did this or you didn't do this, and usually the this was some idea or some belief that conservative Jews or other Jews held or didn't hold. I believe that we are the beneficiaries and the victims of trends in our society and culture that are much larger than us. Conservative Judaism had some booming decades from the 30s into the 60s because of these larger trends, as well as our own professionals and lay leaders, etc. Very important. But now, what's hurting us is not a failure of leadership. It's not a failure of effort. It's these larger trends which once worked in our favor and now are, to a large extent, working against us. So let me tell you some of these trends that are out there so you should know, as an active Jew, and certainly as a leader of a Jewish community, what you're up against. So the first thing you may know is that Americans don't want to join things. And if they join, they don't want to stay there. So you don't have to read the fine print. This is a chart of PTA membership in the United States. And it's not because women are working outside the home. Women who do not work outside the home are not joining PTAs in larger numbers than women who do work outside the home. Americans don't want to join things. That's true of all voluntary organizations. We Jews are feeling it too. Churches are certainly feeling it. Membership is a problem. People want to do fee for service for a very short period of time. They won't commit. Second, before you get to the Pew Report about the Jews, there was a Pew Report about religious affiliation in the United States from 2009 called Faith in Flux. So here's a statistic to bend your mind around. 44% of the American people who currently practice a religion do not practice the religion they were raised in. 44%. Now that counts a Baptist who becomes an Episcopalian or vice versa as practicing a different religion. To Jews, this may be strange. They're both Protestants. But if you're a Protestant, the difference between a Baptist and an Episcopalian is just as great as between being a Jew and a Baptist. 44% have switched religions. If Jews are switching, nothing strange there. That's what Americans do. Next one. 2012 Pew study is called Nuns on the Rise, N-O-N-E-S. Those of us who are scholars of American religion used to think that the fastest growing religion in America was fundamentalism evangelicalism, and Mormonism. That was true until the early 90s. That's already 20 years ago. Since the early 90s, the fastest growing religion in America is none. So here's a nice figure, another one to get your mind around. Between 2007 and 2012, 5 years, Protestantism, Protestant churches lost 5% of their members. 12 million people, not to death, they just left the churches. 5 years, 12 million people. So if Jews are leaving Judaism, your first instinct should not be to blame what the people in those synagogues are doing or not doing. You should recognize this is what we're living in right now. This is America in 2014. The only other statistic I will give you is the intermarriage statistic, and here also Jews are very normative for the United States as a whole. 1/2, this is a Pew report, sorry, this is comes from a book called American Grace by Robert Putnam and David Campbell, which came out, I think, in 2012. 1/2 of adult Americans, when they came to the altar to get married, married someone from a different religion. Again, counting a fundamentalist Protestant as very different from an Episcopalian. Fully 1/3 of American adults who are married are currently married to someone of a different religion. 1/3. And the difference between the half and the third is that older Americans, of like my parents' generation, the woman tended to convert to take on the religion of the husband. That no longer happens. They stay in 2 different religions and sometimes go to 2 different churches or a synagogue and a church. You probably know this. I know this from many of my friends and extended family members, and you probably do too. The flip side of it, which is wonderful, is that Americans are more tolerant than any religious group, than any religious population has ever been. So we all know that America is a very religious country, still, despite the nuns on the rise. But what's amazing about Americans is that we're tolerant. So here's that same book, American Grace. People not of my faith can go to heaven. 98% of Mormons agree, 80-some percentage of Catholics agree, 80% of mainline Protestants, there were too few Jews to count. To believe that your neighbors of a different religion are actually going to heaven like you and not to hell, this is new in the history of religion. It means you might actually want to marry such people. You might want to have them as friends. You can certainly respect them. This is all good for Jews, but the flip side is it makes it harder to explain why be this rather than that, because your good friends and your coworkers and perhaps your spouse and certainly members of your extended family are of a different religion. So the case you make has to be different. So then how do you go and make that case? Well, I think the answer has to be the twofold case, which I've outlined before, and now I'm going to say a few more words about it, of community and meaning. Look, Americans are very lonely. We don't like to talk about this all the time, especially, people who are trying to sell something. You want to make the sale on the basis of something positive. But we should recognize that in all too many cases, people are coming to synagogue because they are lonely and disconnected. They are alienated. They want connection. And the sad thing is that they often leave synagogues feeling more lonely than they did when they came in the door. I cannot make this case strong enough. I think I'm preaching to the choir in this particular synagogue. I like the room we're in. It's a warm room. Some of you are actually looking at one another. It's great. You can't get lost here very easily. But wherever I go around the United States, and I've done this first as a professor for 20 years, and now as the Chancellor for 7 years, people come up to me at Kiddush after services because they can come up to me. Because I'm the visitor, and anybody who wants to can talk to me. And they tell me that I've been coming to the synagogue for months or years, and no one has ever said a word to me. I do not make this up. You may know this from experience. And I try to teach our rabbinical students who are very idealistic, of course, and want to do a good job. And we teach them community organizing, and we make them take courses in clinical pastoral education to make them be better listeners. And I try to tell them that no matter how good your sermon is, no matter how good your liturgy is, if you have not created a community in your synagogue, you have failed the people in the building. Your job is to be a builder of community, because that's what Jews do. That's why we're here 3,000 years later. And your second job is to give people who are often casting about for a purpose in life, who have 1,000 messages a minute coming in at them on their smartphones, everybody trying to sell you something, but very few people offering you meaning to live by. Where do you turn to get that meaning? How should you raise your kids? How do I make life worthwhile? How do I make the world better? Everybody's trying to sell you something, but most people are not giving you what your spirit craves. And we have to give a combination to the mind and the spirit and the heart. So I regard us as partners to a covenant. And now we get to what we're really offering people, like this community and meaning that we're offering them. You notice when I wrote the book, I don't know how many of you can see this, but I think you can, the word conservative is in small letters here. The word Judaism is in big letters. Conservative is a kind of Judaism. It's one way of living and practicing Torah. And what all kinds of Judaism worthy of the name are offering people is participation in a covenant. To me, that's the central moment of Judaism. So let me talk for a few minutes about covenant, and you'll see how the covenant itself demands the formula for success that I've been talking about until now. Think about it. What happens in Mount Sinai? So if I were to take off my kippah and put back my Stanford professor hat as a professor of comparative religion, I could say to you, without any fear of contradiction, that we are the only major religion in the world that was founded as both a religion and a people. We are a community as well as a faith. And you can't take away one from the other, even though some people have tried, but it doesn't work. It's not true to Jewish tradition. And I would make the case that our brothers and sisters and cousins in Israel are engaged in a historical process of somehow reuniting the religious tradition of Judaism with the society and community of Judaism we now have in the form of a living state. I think a notion of a purely secular Judaism is an aberration, and it's a contradiction in terms. It was a historical necessity, perhaps. But we are not going to stay that way for very long, because there's something in the human being that craves meaning and transcendence and significance, and Judaism offers that. But there's also something in the human being that craves community and being connected to a larger entity than yourself. And that's what covenant does. So let's talk about each of these elements of covenant in turn. We're a people. We're a people. I learned why that mattered when I was a student at Penn and then a colleague at Stanford of a man who, one of my great mentors, who started his adult life as a Protestant, even a Protestant theologian. He was one of the founders of Campus Crusade for Christ, and then you know what happened? He lost his faith. And one day, when he was at our Seder, he used to come to our Seder every year, he said to me, "Arnie, sometimes I wish I were a Jew." And I said, "Van, why?" And he said, "Because now that I lost my faith, the church has absolutely nothing for me. I can't walk in the door. But if I were a Jew, I would still be part of the Jewish community." This is one of the great secrets of our tradition. Belief in God comes and goes. Do your beliefs about love remain the same at 60 as they were at 25? Do your beliefs about all sorts of things stay the same? No, they're in flux, and your beliefs about God are going to come and go. But your community is larger than that. Your community can sustain you. Your community provides what a great sociologist, Peter Berger, called plausibility for this crazy notion that we Jews, who are 2% of the population in America and a fraction of 1% of the world's population, actually matter. That we have something important to say. What idiocy to believe this. And we sustain each other's notion of this, and we make each other effective in the world. I'll tell you one more story about community. At Colamet, We had a fight like synagogues tend to do about whether women, like my wife, who was the daughter of a Levi, could have the Levi Aliyah, or whether only men could have the Levi Aliyah. And this fight went on for several years, and then there was one family that said, if you vote for Levi Aliyahs for women, we're leaving the synagogue. In the month before the vote, they had some serious personal difficulties in their family. And the members of the congregation, no matter what their opinion on the Levi question, stood by them. And when the time came around for the vote, they could have cared less about the vote. This was their community and they knew it. Community is stronger than ideology. Community sustains pluralistic viewpoints. So if we're a community, that means we have to have lots of different kinds of people. It means that Mordechai Kaplan was right. You don't just have religion, you're basically a synagogue center. There's more going on than religion, more than education. You've got social justice. You've got groups for this and groups for that. I've always been in favor of atheists coming to synagogue on Saturday mornings and doing whatever they want to do together. Let's have a study group about God. I love the joke about the Jews who debate whether God exists, take a break to daven mincha, and then go back to debating whether God exists. That's Jews. So to base everything on religion is false to the covenant. You step into a Jewish anything, anywhere, you become part of a people that's done amazing things in the world for 3,000 years, and right now is doing great things in the world, in Israel, and elsewhere, certainly in North America. And it's yours. It's your patrimony. Take it. Be part of this community. So that's what you want. You want to give people this experience of community. And if you look at our institutions that work, it's institutions that give people a palpable sense of community. Jewish day camps and summer camps. Day schools. Synagogues that have their act together where the school is part of a living community that knows what it stands for, and the school is not off to the side that they leave to some professionals to do, but is really part of the community. Those synagogues and schools work. Youth movements. Where you offer people community, trips to Israel. Why do trips to Israel succeed? Not just because of what happens on the streets in Israel, but because of what happens on those buses visiting Israel. Community is built. And meaning is provided at the same time in all those cases. So I associate Kaplan as the voice in my head teaching me about community, and Heschel is the voice in my head talking to me about meaning. One of Heschel's great lines, as you know there were many, but he said Judaism has to answer the vital human questions. How shall I use my time, my resources, my powers? And to me, the secret of Judaism is really summed up in the V'ahavta because of the word b'chol. It gives you a chance for wholeness, not just part of your heart, but all of your heart. And you know, if you know the Hebrew, b'chol avavcha, it doesn't just mean the seat of your emotions, it means your head. Imagine a religion which insists that head and heart are supposed to work together. B'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, not just with okay, I'm going to stick my religion here because my science is over here, and I must not let my science get in the way of my religion. That is a definition of schizophrenia. That is not wholeness. Judaism wants wholeness. And the homodecha, all my vital being, all my energy, all that makes me me. So, I want my love for Beethoven and Mozart to be connected to my Jewishness. I want the human in me to be bound up with the Jewish in me and not to be in separate pockets. And I love conservative Judaism because it offers me that. It demands that of me. We're not the only kind of Judaism that demands that, but a kind of Judaism that does not demand that, I don't think can work in this day and age, not in large numbers. Put it positively, what we have going for us is this offer of wholeness and meaning, and a connection to God at the same time as we're wise enough as a tradition not to define God, not to dogmatize about God, to say we don't know the final truth about God, and therefore there will be many names, many images, and if you want to say that God is a force and not a person, you have a long history of great Jews in front of you. Meaning and community both. That's on offer. And the final piece of covenant that I value is it needs our agency. It needs our action. It gives me something to do. It tells me that if you leave this world no better than you found it, you have failed the covenant. For reasons we will never fathom, God, however you understand God, needs human beings, in the first instance Jews. We introduced this notion to the world, to be partners in fulfilling creation. I don't think this has ever meant as much as it does right now, because the potential for massive destruction, including destruction of the planet, is absolute. So the notion of God needing human beings to preserve and maintain the planet is more relevant now than ever before. But with the capacity to blow each other up by the hundreds of thousands, this is also a very relevant teaching. So Judaism tells you that God needs you. And that's why Heschel and Kaplan together mean so much to me, because both of them taught me this lesson in their books and in person, that to be a Jew is to be active in the world, not to be off seeking enlightenment somewhere, not to be an ascetic off in the wilderness. The work you do in the world 9 to 5 or 9 to midnight outside the synagogue is every bit as important, if not more so. It's part of your Jewish living as a Jewish human being as this work you do here. So I'm really convinced that this is a message for today and tomorrow. And I really fully believe, again, not because of optimism that's native, but because of good, sober arguments, that this is what America wants. And so I've got the luxury now, the privilege now, the duty of leading an institution which has to be involved in this effort of revitalization. So if there are young people out there searching for a community and searching for a meaning in New York City and elsewhere, JTS has to be there with them and is there with them. If you have people online with possibilities of connecting that never existed before, JTS has to be online and in social media, and we are. If you have a new field of activity called Jewish early childhood education, JTS has to pioneer the training of leaders in early childhood education, and we do. If you've got Camp Ramah as one of the most successful efforts in all of American Jewish life, it happens that we own and supervise Camp Ramah and have since its inception 60-some years ago. We're there, and we're going to train the leaders who are going to make a difference in every aspect of American Jewish life. And I urge you to join me. Of course, I'd love everybody here to support JTS and our efforts. But join me in the optimism for the future of American Jewish life. That's not a feel-good, goody-goody kind of optimism. It's not a vain hope. But it's the kind of optimism where you say, Jews have succeeded many times through many worse situations. The curses that we have right now are a function of the enormous blessings we have. To be a Jew alive in 2014, just think about it. To be a Jew here, right now, in 2014, means that you get to be alive at the same moment as the state of Israel. And no matter how bad things are in the state of Israel, it's much better to have an Israel facing problems than not to have an Israel. Clearly. And here we are in what is unquestionably the greatest diaspora the Jewish people has ever known, the United States of America in the 21st century. These are our gifts. What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with them? Right? So to me, my plea is, let's not give in to the doom and gloom. And these people who tell us we're about to disappear, dismiss them with the ridicule they deserve. The question is, are we going to roll up our sleeves, each and every one of us, and do what needs to be done to build communities like this synagogue, like our camps, our schools, et cetera, et cetera. Do the work that needs to be done. JTS is going to be there doing that work, and I hope we're all going to be doing it together. Thank you very much.
Useless microphone. The Chancellor will,
It's out.
it's out. You did really well. I
Thank
think
you.
everybody heard you. The Chancellor will take questions, and if
Or
you want,
comments.
or comments.
Hopefully questions.
If you want to raise your hands, I'll just point, and you can stand and say your question loudly so everyone can hear. Go.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. The meaning part is still a little murky to me. I had a conversation with a Chabad rabbi in town. He said, I don't understand you people. You don't teach your kids that the Torah is God's word handed down on Mount Sinai. So how do we teach meaning? How do we imbibe the community with meaning without dogma? I mean, how do you do that?
So the answer to the Chabad rabbis, we've been doing this quite successfully for a very long time. And I understand it's much simpler to be able to tell people God's word, literally. And if you don't buy it, you're out. There's no way to heaven except this. And Chabad, thankfully, is not Satan. If you're Satan, kids who die of cancer, God did that. And to me, that's obscene. It's not Judaism. Chabad doesn't agree with Satan on that, thankfully. So once you get inside the camp, as it were, you recognize there are serious differences inside the camp, and I'm going to take Chabad over Satmar any day. Chabad has a very long and proud intellectual tradition, which Satmar doesn't have. So, I then tell your Chabad rabbi that my teacher, Solomon Schechter, the founder of my institution, JTS, wrote an essay called The Seminary as Witness. And a page I treasure in that essay says, you know what? Rashi and Maimonides agreed about practically nothing where belief was concerned. And then he says, what kept them together? Why are they both great Jews? First answer, they celebrated the same feasts and fasts. Feasts and fasts. Think about it. You sit down at that Passover Seder. You don't have to sign on the dotted line and go around the room. I believe, literally, that in 1220 BCE, God parted the Red Sea and took those children of Israel out of Egypt. You may believe that, and you may not, but Passover means a lot to you. Okay? So now we come to the Torah, and I'll say to you, I would say to my Chabad friends, I'm 63 years old. Aside from my family and my closest friends, the Torah is the most precious gift I have in this world. I thank God all the time that I have the Torah. It is a source of constant meaning and inspiration to me. And that meaning and inspiration does not depend on belief in the literal truth of the Bereshit narrative. I don't have to believe that the world was literally created 5,700 and whatever it is years ago, to believe that those chapters about creation are the most profound thoughts about creation I have ever encountered in my life. And I've read some Buddhism, and I've read some Christianity, and I've studied Plato and Aristotle, and the Bible is hands down the most profound thing I know. So when you live inside of it, it gives you this meaning and you know it. It's a long-winded answer, but I just want to say one more thing. Forgive me again for a personal reference, but I know I'm not unique in this. I once had to make a really awesome decision. I'm responsible for a maiden aunt of mine who was very old, and there was a question, and she had no children. I was the person who had to decide whether the feeding tube got inserted or not. Thank God I had a Jewish ethical tradition to guide me in making that decision. How do you make such a decision by yourself? Where do you get the resources? How do you know anything? But I came from a tradition, which thankfully I had an education in, which taught me some things. And I know Judaism means that way all the time to all sorts of Jews. And that's how the answer is. Even without an absolute dogmatic, literal belief, we still have all sorts of meaning. We know things that are true. There's lots that's true. I'm sorry to take so long in the answer, but it's such an important question. It's such a great question. And often enough we don't answer. I was at a lecture like this in Baltimore about 7 years ago. I had just become Chancellor. I had spoken for an hour, and a young man in the back, he was about 15 years old, he said, yes, Chancellor Eisen, but tell me, what's true? And I've been trying to answer that question.
synagogues, I don't know whether they're conservative synagogues or other types of synagogues, were offering different types of paths for the bar mitzvah, where they were, taking away the centrality of the service and perhaps the Torah reading and substituting other things that they thought would be more meaningful. Is the conservative tradition looking to, in the future, be more flexible in terms of perhaps the variety of how it's teaching its rabbis to go out and conduct services, perhaps, with religious education, are there different paths? Because frankly, to a lot of us, I think there is some truth in what the Pew Report was saying with respect to some of the conservative traditional means being not as relevant as they may have been for a prior generation. If you look around the room, I don't see a lot of people in their 20s and 30s. Now the question is, are we encouraging our rabbis to do things a little bit differently?
Totally. But I want you to say yes. I mean, I could just give a yes answer and then move on. We are a people. Let's say we're a community that's working with institutions that are at least 60 years old, and in some cases 100 years old. The model of synagogue schools that we're working with is a model that the New York City Board of Education, with Mordechai Kaplan's leadership, pioneered in the 20s and 30s. The model of suburban synagogues they're working with is from the 50s. Bar and bar mitzvah have not changed at most places. And here we are, and we all have these things in our pockets. And they've revolutionized everything, including education. So the story that drove this home to me, again, forgive me for being personal, I had the occasion, my dad passed away at the age of 97 and a half a few years ago, and I'll never forget watching my dad on the sofa being taught by my son. My son was trying to teach him how to use a laptop computer. He was surfing, wireless, in Palo Alto, California. Okay? And my dad said, I'm never going to learn this, but I've got one for you. When I was a kid, we had ice and coal delivered to my house. We had no refrigerator. My son is wide-eyed, like, okay? And what this teaches me is that my son's Judaism can't be the same as my father's. And yet, of course, in some sense, it has to be. So how do we navigate that? So that's what we're trying to teach our rabbis and cantors and educators to do. How do we find that balance? And it's an art, it's not a science. So, to have a bar mitzvah kid studying Torah, I just attended a bar mitzvah in Cherry Hill, New Jersey a couple weeks ago, the daughter of one of our trustees, and it's great to see an intelligent 13-year-old kid find meaning in the Torah. And occasionally I go to a service and they teach me things I hadn't thought of before. That's great. Should that be all of their bar mitzvah? No. If you don't have a mitzvah project as part of your bar mitzvah, you're missing out on part of the notion of being a bar mitzvah and being responsible. So it's not an either or. So we are trying to empower our students to be the custodians of a tradition, which is not like taking a book and putting it in a binding and keeping it on the shelf. No, you want to make it live. So that means you're going to do some things differently. How do you know what to do differently and what not to do? And there's no formula. But we have to fill them with it so that they feel it's theirs. And if I trust them, that if they're inside its study and inside its practice, the changes they make are going to carry the tradition forward. I think we have no other choice but to prepare them like that and to trust them.
I am, you can't tell. Thank you for coming. Question I have is personal to us, but I know that a lot of other congregants have similar situations. Our children that were raised in the synagogue with the traditional Jewish values and stuff have chosen mates that are not Jewish and choose to practice no religion at all. How do you address that issue as far as the longevity of Judaism?
Where the Pew Report is a wake-up call, we better pay attention to it, is that for the moment we're holding our own, but that's not going to last very much longer. And I did not want to give this talk with I didn't want to make this a bad news talk, but let's just say and recognize that all of the institutions of American Jewish life, which are so important, are not being sustained by ultra-Orthodox Jews and will not be sustained by ultra-Orthodox Jews. I'm not talking about conservative synagogues. I'm talking about Federation, APAC, American Jewish Committee, Hadassah, JCCs, Jewish Studies programs, all of this stuff that we've built over the last half century, if the current trends continue, is going to vanish in 30 years or less. Okay? That's the fact that we've got to reckon with. That's why this community has got to wake up as a community and take some drastic action and do the things that we know are called for. Like send more of our kids to intensive Jewish summer camps, finance more day schools, etc., etc. Now, as I tried to explain, I believe that intermarriage is a function of the success of Jews in the United States. There was no intermarriage when non-Jews would not marry us, and the fact that non-Jews want to marry Jews is a testimony to the tolerance of American society, which, as I explained before, is across the board. And we're not going to solve the problem of intermarriage by telling young Jews to feel guilty about marrying non-Jews. So, I'm not in favor of conservative rabbis changing their stance on this and performing intermarriages, because I think the marriage ceremony and the tradition have a certain amount of integrity. But I'm one of those people who believes that non-Jews have a full place in the synagogue the day after that marriage. I know it's a contradiction, logically, but it's not experientially. I want to give young Jews, before they get to the age of marriage, such a consistent set of experiences about Judaism that are deep and positive that they don't want to think of marrying someone outside the tradition. And once they do marry, if they marry someone outside the tradition, I want to make our institutions much more welcoming than they are right now. Under the theory that people who are not Jewish have souls and hearts and minds, and they need meaning, and they need community, and we have the wherewithal to offer those things. So it's a difficult formula, especially in the United States, because we are swimming upstream. The message, look, I taught at Stanford for 20 years. The message of the university, certainly of Stanford, is a message of universalism. There was a dean of students at Stanford who actually declared in print that just as every Stanford student should take a variety of courses, every Stanford student should date people from a variety of traditions and religious backgrounds. The message of the university is universalism, and almost all of our students of college age are in college getting this message. We want them to be part of the larger world. Being part of the larger world means having non-Jewish good friends, co-workers, pals. We're also looking at a situation that's radically different than it was even 20 years ago in another respect. And I don't know if you've all read the Pew Report and dealt with this reality. We used to think, okay, we'll raise Jewish kids, they'll go away for a few years in their 20s, by the late 20s they're going to get married. Most of them will marry Jews, then they'll start having kids and they'll join synagogues. So the percentage of non-Orthodox Jews over 40 who have never ever been married is huge. I don't know the exact number, but it's huge. Jews are marrying much later, if they marry at all. They're having fewer children if they have children. That, combined with the intermarriage numbers, is causing a steep decline in numbers. So, go away from your question for 1 second. From a communal point of view, we will not win on numbers right now. We will win on quality, and quality will bring back numbers. You have to focus on quality right now and not numbers. Offer the communities, fill them with meaning, see if people come. They will come, I believe. But focusing on the families, all I can say, I don't know this from personal experience except from my friends and my cousins, etc. If you have non-Jews in your family, just love them as much as you can. Just be the person you are. Be the person you are, who is a Jewish person, and invite them into a Jewish home, and love them. And there's no recipe for anything. But I'm convinced, and JTS has undertaken a big initiative on conversion. I think there are a lot of people out there who would convert to Judaism if we asked them, and if we went after them, and offered them a really good program. And we have not done this. We have not done this. So you might be shocked to know the sum total number, apparently, to the best of our knowledge. Ask yourself, how many Jewish converts are there alive in the United States right now? The answer is about 80,000. 80,000. Out of a population of 6 million, only 80,000 are converts. And the number of people who convert from Judaism to some other religion is just as large, probably. We don't have exact data, but we think it's probably as large as the number of people who convert from some other tradition to Judaism. This is America. So we are not making it on numbers. I want to go for quality and welcome. So community means welcome. If you're not a Jew, welcome. I'll stop there.
I'm Mark Oldenfeld. Welcome. I'm aware that in the Pew study, the Orthodox, not the ultra-Orthodox, but the Orthodox, had a 97% intact Jewish family on the next generation. And I worry that we're fighting for our life as conservative Jews and as American Jews. If that other model, the modern Orthodox, or the Orthodox that's not the Haredi model, is able to retain its youth to such a different degree than we are, is it possible that we need to rethink certain fundamental orientations of conservative Judaism that has allowed a vast loss of our children, and if in 30 years you say we're going to even be thinner in our numbers significantly, is there a way that we maybe need to rethink something of our relationship to our tradition, with relation to our halakha, with relation to our lifestyle choices, that the Orthodox maybe are finding for themselves that works?
I'm glad you asked this question. So, Professor Jack Wertheimer of JTS and Professor Steve Cohen, who I think is the leading sociologist of American Jewry, published a study last week, which I first heard about last spring. Find it on the web. It's in Mosaic, which is an online magazine. The Jewish Week had a piece by them also. The Pew Report did not help us by not breaking down the non-Orthodox population. In other words, they divided the Jewish community into Orthodox and non-Orthodox. And they gave us the statistic you just cited, which is that 97% of Orthodox Jews are marrying Jews, including modern Orthodox Jews, and then 72% of non-Orthodox Jews are marrying non-Jews. But what does this non-Orthodox population consist of? So what Jack and Steve did is they went back to the raw data. They said, does it make a difference what kind of Jewish life you lead as a non-Orthodox Jew? And lo and behold, it does. So for example, the intermarriage rate for the last 15 years of those raised Reformed is 82%. The intermarriage rate for the last 15 years of those raised Conservative is 38%. Further, so what is it? It's not just denomination, it's not beliefs. It's what I would call thickness of Jewish life and Jewish experience. So, what Steve and Jack can now tell you is that in terms of adult identity, not just marriage partner, but identity as a whole, summer camp experiences make a huge difference. Day schools make a huge difference. Participation in a synagogue makes a huge difference. All the things that we've been investing in for the last generation actually make a difference. So if you look at the conservative Jews who've done these things, you find their percentage of adult affiliation and in marriage is very close to that of Orthodox. So it's not the Orthodox, non-Orthodox. It's the quality of the Jewish life that one is leading. So again, what in Orthodoxy makes it work? And by the way, I should tell you that the Pew Report itself shows that 2/3 of those raised conservative or Reform are not as adults living as conservative or Reform Jews. 1/3 of those raised Orthodox are not living as Orthodox Jews. 1/3. They're losing 1/3. It's better than 2/3. It's not nothing. I would say what Orthodoxy offers, and here's my analysis, it's not doctrinal belief. It's not fear of going to hell. It's extremely tight communities, an incredible meaning system. And the number one secret they have, in my estimation, is Shabbat. Shabbat is the number one asset of modern Orthodoxy. Now, if we want to be sociologists, let's recognize that modern Orthodoxy has a birth rate of above 3. Conservative and Reform have a birth rate of 1.7. Orthodoxy has a birth rate above 3. And even so, the Orthodox percentage of the American Jewish population is 3%. The conservative percentage is about 11%. The Haredi percentage is 6%. Haredi still only has 6% despite a birth rate of above 6. But still, despite that birth rate, which is now doubling the Haredi population every 15 years, they still only make up 6% of American Jews. So we could, if we were modern Orthodox instead of conservative, my modern Orthodox friends are not feeling very confident about the future of modern Orthodoxy right now. They're feeling better than conservative Jews are. But they're worried, they're losing their kids to Haredi schools, the Haredi teachers, the Haredi rabbis who are telling them, you're fakes. The only real Jews are the ultra-Orthodox Jews like us. I think as conservative Jews, we know what we have to do. Learning. Emphasize learning. You can't let somebody else know it for you. You gotta learn it. You gotta practice it. And you gotta build strong communities.
Can you elaborate on learning and what you have in mind with regard to learning for the community?
Yeah, I think that look, modern Orthodoxy is strong today. I believe I can say this not as the Chancellor of JTS, but as a scholar of American Judaism, because of what young Israel did 30 years ago when it came to learning. They said to be a member of the Orthodox world, you had to be learned. And they did this for men, and then the women soon caught up. So the Orthodox women are now a very, very learned population. We did not have the same ethos in conservative Judaism. JTS did, but it didn't find its way to the congregations. We did it vicariously. We had a learned rabbinate and a learned elite, and most people said, no, I don't have the time. I went to Hebrew school. I'm done now. No Jewish community has ever survived without Jewish literacy and without Jewish language. We cannot make it without Jewish literacy and Jewish language. So when you say, shouldn't we learn something from Orthodoxy, I think the answer is not to become Orthodox, but to see what elements of Orthodoxy are so crucial. And if I had my druthers, if I got one thing to change, I would follow the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who always said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe always said the most important thing is Shabbat. Create a Jewish time and space, at home and outside the home for every Jew. I would settle for 12 hours first. If I can't get 25, I'd start with 12. If we don't do that, I agree, we're gone. But it's not impossible. I really don't believe it's impossible. Will our numbers shrink? Yes, and it's good that our numbers will shrink. You know why? We have a lot of people in our communities who are there by chance. Don't really care about Judaism very much. Okay, let's make our community stronger. They'll leave. It's okay. I'm not the mortgage committee. I know I feel bad about that. But seriously. But you can't have members just to pay bills. You have to have communities where people are committed to the community. They have to participate fully in the life of the community and not just write a check. We have time for a couple more questions. Can I call on this person?
Sure.
Yes.
I've
I've been authorized.
Speaking about Shabbat and numbers and the mortgage committee, we have 500 units, meaning about 700-800 individuals. If we get 10% of them on a Shabbat morning, and we get the same 10%, what do you suggest we do to have more people come and be involved in our community, in this sanctuary on a Shabbat morning?
See, it's a hard question to ask an outsider, and I'm not, I'll avoid it the best I can because I have to know exactly what you're doing and not doing. But first of all, let's decenter the synagogue away from Saturday morning. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all, and it never was for Jews. Okay? Secondly, so what goes on the rest of the week is very important to me. Second of all, what happens on Shabbat in the home is more important than what happens in Shabbat in the synagogue. Okay? That's especially true when little children are there, but not only. So what happens in the home is more important even than what happens in the synagogue. Third, I would like, as Mordechai Kaplan wanted, I want to get Jews together on Shabbat. How should we do that? So I recognize that prayer is a very difficult thing for us adults in this generation to do. Most of us are not comfortable with it. So therefore, I want to do something else as well. So study is the first natural option. I have never yet met adult Jews who, when put in front of a Jewish text with a good teacher, have not responded. Jews always respond to Torah, other texts, with good teachers in them. It's always a winner. And many synagogues have Shabbat morning study groups. And there are many Jews who come to those study groups and then go home. Okay, that's their Shabbat thing. I'm a pluralist about this because Judaism is not just a religion, it's a civilization. If you're worried about Israel, and you want to talk to other Jews, and it's natural. I don't just want to read the New York Times and listen to TV about Israel right now. I'm starved. I want to know what my fellow Jews in Israel and around the world think about what's going on right now. Let's take Shabbat. Let's get together and talk about that. Right? Do we do yoga? Do we do meditation? What are we doing for our spirituality? Do we have services where we take 5 lines of the service and focus on those 5 lines for an hour and a half? What are we doing to experiment with liturgy? So there are various things that are going on, and then I want to conclude that answer with music. So I can't sing to save my life anymore. I once was decent, but I played piano for a number of years, and for me, I know about myself that the key to my spirituality is music. So,
Do a setup.
and then those Hasidic rabbis used to read the minds of the people they were singing. So, I can't poskin on the notion of musical instruments on Shabbat, but what I can say is that a synagogue which chooses to have musical instruments doesn't guarantee success. The question is how those instruments are used as an aid to davening and not a replacement for davening. And second of all, if you don't use musical instruments, it's your obligation to find other ways to make the music transcendently good as something that inspires people. Right? I'm in shul for the music, and my synagogue, does not have a chazan. But I want great davening. We don't often get it, but I want music. Right? So the soul needs music. And so I want Shabbat to include music. That's not a plea for musical instruments, that's a plea for music.
One over here, and then maybe this will be the last one, and will you mingle with us during dessert?
I'll mingle.
Can I go back to what you called your contradiction? So if conservative rabbis and cantors are not allowed to perform intermarriages, but then you want those intermarried people to come into the synagogue, why would they come back if they were turned away? And what could I say to a young person who wants to marry out of the faith but can't come to my rabbi or my cantor to do that? What can I say to them to bring them in the fold?
I think I'm tempted to say we're out of time.
She'll meet you at dessert either way. Yeah.
I've been working on a long piece about this because it doesn't get answered by a short answer. For instance, I've made it a point of principle, and we have at JTS, that we don't talk about intermarriage, we talk about marriage. I will only talk about intermarriage in the context of marriage. I can only talk about why it's important to marry another Jew in the context of talking about what marriage is and what love is. It has to be a positive message about marriage and love and those possibilities. Second of all, we're trying to encourage rabbis to, if this is your red line, that is, you're not going to do intermarriages, you have to work around that every creative way you possibly can. So it turns out there are all sorts of experiments going on under the radar, and they're kept under the radar because the minute they come above the radar, there are going to be people who object. Under the radar, for example, there's a conservative rabbi who says something like the following. If someone wants me to marry them, I have to have a relationship with at least one member of the couple. I'm not the caterer. I'm not the flowers. I'm not the photographer. If I don't know the person, I won't marry them. But if I do know the person and they choose to marry a non-Jew, I want to have a relationship with them before that and after it. So this particular rabbi has a relationship with the Reform rabbi down the street. And the Reform rabbi, instead of profiting from this situation to get new members for the Reform synagogue, actually does the premarital counseling together with the conservative rabbi with the understanding that after the ceremony, that couple is going to join the conservative synagogue. Because this rabbi has a relationship antecedently with one member of the couple. There's another rabbi who made headlines with a proposal I support. He said, you come to me Labor Day and say, Rabbi, we really want to get married, over winter vacation, but my fiance is not a Jew. Instead of the rabbi saying, well, I'd be happy to convert you and that's a 2-year process, which I invite you to sign up for now, the rabbi says, let's start conversion process now. I will do the wedding, and I'll convert you, do the wedding, and then you'll continue studying as a couple after the wedding. He presented this at a closed-door meeting of rabbis at JTS, and you know what they told him? We've been doing that for years. Turns out it's possible. It's been done. And you know when it's been done? If the bride, whether the bride is the Jew or the non-Jew, is pregnant and doesn't want to be showing all that much at the time of wedding, rabbis, as a humanitarian gesture, have speeded up conversion to make sure that wedding can happen before the bride is showing all that much. And this is now common practice. Again, it's below the radar. I'm not trying to change the official rules of the Rabbinical Assembly, and I'm not a rabbi. What I'm saying is, there are ways to be creative. And what one young rabbi said to me, who I thought was very wise, he said, our job is to be kind. People will understand if it's our principle that we can't do an intermarriage, and if we're a real human being for them and not a dogma, they'll give us credit for that, they'll respect us for that, but they want us to be kind. And that's kind of my philosophy about this. I want to raise a generation of Jewish leaders who are kind. I think we can work with this. Again, we will lose some numbers. But this really is a threat to our community. And the sad part is, many of my good friends and family members are intermarried, and some of them are active Jews in those intermarriages. But you should know, if you do it, that you are going against the current. Less than 1/3 of the children of these intermarriages are raised as Jews. Less than 1/5, about 17% marry Jews. And of their children, very few marry Jews. So the percentage of grandchildren of intermarriages who are Jews is 8%. 8%. That's why the non-Orthodox segment of the Pew Report is now so huge, and why it's skewed so far to the left. Because we now have a generation of people who are intermarried and children of intermarriages. Here's another shocker. I won't end with this. I can't because it's terrible. I'll say one more thing afterwards. There are 2 million individuals in the United States. 2 million individuals in the United States who have at least one Jewish parent. And if you ask them if you're a Jew, they'll say, no, I'm not a Jew. 2 million people. We lost, in this generation, 2 million people to the Jewish community. Okay? That's a terrible thing to do. So therefore, these questions that you're raising must be dealt with. But again, and I end like the Haftorah, I repeat the optimism, okay? The optimistic line at the end is, but look at what we're offering. This is Judaism. This is one of the greatest gifts to the world that has ever been made. We are the heirs to a tradition that is second to none in its wisdom, its profundity, its joy, its rituals, its intellectual capacity, and its communities. We're going to be fine.